been a few weeks, actually, a couple of weeks since we've been in Genesis. We had a couple of guest speakers. So if you remember last time that we met, so we're going through the book of Genesis, kind of somewhat overview fashion, and through the Bible, and we're going through Genesis, and we call it dawn, as you see in the graphic there, because it's really the dawn of all things: time, man, civilization, and so on. But last time we met, we covered pretty much the flood with Noah and so on. And then chapter 8 ended with Noah coming out of the ark and worshiping God, right? And then we had God responding. Oh, the aroma of Noah's worship was pleasing to God. And then God responds as well to Noah by telling him that never again was he going to curse the ground for man's sake. And that until God comes to fully redeem the earth, that the earth and all its seasons and so on and so forth will continue, right? Will continue. Just as it has until today. We still continue. It's part of God's promise to us. Now, we pick it up in chapter 9, and we're not quite finished with Noah and his story. And I love how the Bible works, because the Bible is very good about showing us not only the good stuff about individuals within the Bible, but also kind of sharing with us sometimes some of their weak points, right? Their flaws, right? So we see even the righteous men in the Bible or women in the Bible, they have flaws, right? So we're going to see Noah, and I appreciate when we see that about some of these heroes of the faith, is because it tells me that even though I may make errors, I may mess up, God still loves me. God still can use me, right? And so that's good. And it's grace. It's all about grace. I was talking with a young man earlier, a couple weeks ago, and he came into the crossing here, and I was talking with him, and one of the things he said, he wasn't a believer, but he said, I prefer, he's talking about kind of gods of kind of mythology and stuff, and he goes, I prefer my gods to be flawed. And I thought, wow, that's an interesting kind of way to think about things. And I understand that we want to in some way relate, I guess, to our gods or whatever. And that's a sentiment of a lot of people, but here's the thing. That's only good unless you're depending upon them, right? It's only good unless you put your hopes in them. Unless you like relying upon them, then they let you down if that's the case. And if you really think about it, wouldn't you prefer your God to be perfect? To always be there for you when you're relying upon him? That someone who will never let you down? That's obviously who we are as far as Christians, who we look to, the God of the Bible, Jehovah. And I understand it's comforting when we see our Bible heroes have flaws, because we can kind of feel like, okay, they're just like us, they're feet of clay and so on and so forth. But as I told this young man, really, if you think about it, if your God has flaws, well, to be honest with you, they're not a God, right? They cease to become God if they're flawed, right? God, the idea of God is perfection. And we serve a God that is the same as the Bible says yesterday, today, and forever, right? So with that, let's kind of open if you already turned to chapter 9 of Genesis. Verse 1, we're going to go through 3 chapters, so we're going to cover a lot tonight. So it might go a little bit long, but we're going to cover 3 chapters. So verse 1, it says, So God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. So we'll stop there. Noah, listen, at this point in time, Noah has been completely obedient to God, right? I mean, he built the ark. It took him many years, right? And through that time, he's basically a witness, preaching to the judgment was coming to the people, and he was obedient. And listen, God blesses obedience. He blesses obedience, right? And then he worshiped God as well after he came out of the ark, and God blesses our worship. The idea here, when we serve God, when we bless God, he always blesses in return. There's this old saying, you can't out-bless or you can't out-give God. God always returns that upon us. right? Someone once said, God will be a debtor to no man. So when we give to God or we bless God or we do something in obedience, God's always going to do that and then some and beyond. He's going to always return because that's who God is. He's just that way. Now, God tells Noah, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. So it's the same command as he gave to Adam and Eve, right? Be fruitful, fill the earth. So kind of in the same way as we are descendants, all descendants of Adam, we're all descendants of Noah. So in a real, very real sense, Noah's kind of like a reboot for God. Like, okay, we're going to start all over again. We're going to start with Noah and his children. But with this reboot, we're going to see some significant changes, right? So look at verse 2. And he says, and the fear of you and the dread of you, and he's not saying Noah himself, this is mankind, shall be on every beast of the earth, on every bird of the air, and on all that move on the earth, and on all the fish of the sea they are given into your hand. Adam was given dominion, right? But this implies there's a change in kind of the way man and other animals and all the different creatures of the earth will kind of interact. It's not all peaceful and Edenic, kind of a state. Now it's a little bit kind of different, right? And they're going to have dominion, but it's going to be a dominion of fear and a dread. And if you think about it, that's exactly how we see it today, right? Man is, for the most part, the dominant species on the planet, right? And animals, for the most part, run from man. They run from. Now, there's a few animals like we would probably run from them, but even if that were the case, we have means, because our technology and our intelligence, of even subduing the fiercest of creatures. Right? So that's kind of the way it is. It's that way today. But here's the thing. The animals, for the reason, have rightful dread and fear of a man, because we see this in verse 3. Because here's what God tells Noah in verse 3. Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. I have given you all things, even as the green herbs. Different instructions than we had with Adam, right? Adam was all the trees, and basically, as we said before, most scholars believe, that whole state before the flood was all vegetarians. Everybody was eating vegetables and so on and so forth. God is telling now Noah, I've given you all the animals to eat, right? To eat. And so they were to eat meat. And this is what's interesting. Not only were all the humans going to eat the animals, and we understand this because we look at society, or not society, but nature, if you will, today. And other animals were going to eat other animals too, as well. So this was going to have a drastic change in what God originally stated in the garden. Now, why is this? Why is there a reason God specific now says now I want you to eat meat? So there's a few kind of ideas or thoughts, schools of thoughts. A lot believe that because of the radical change in the climate, right? You're not going to have this kind of climate of growth, and the food isn't always just going to be in abundance everywhere you go, and maybe because the kind of climate is going to change, they're going to need to eat meat for more protein or some other nutrients and so on and so forth before they need those things, as opposed to when they, before the flood. That may be the case. And it's interesting to even note here, think about this, when God tells him this, there is no prohibition of what types of animals they were supposed to eat, right? So that prohibition didn't come till the Mosaic Law. It didn't come till then. So in other words, bacon was on the menu. I like that, but no prohibition. He just said all animals. So that's interesting, right? Now, there's another theory of why God told him to eat meat. Now, and I'm just going to tell you, this is going to maybe sound a little wacky or a little kind of out there. I just thought it was interesting. It was actually a Calvary pastor that I was listening to that was espousing this, or at least he was bringing this particular viewpoint up. Now, some scholars, and again, this is a little out there, but it has some biblical close to validity. I don't know if it's quite validity. They believe that this command to eat meat had something to do with the demonic activity that took place before the flood, right? So, when all the demons were either possessing humans and having relations with women or just whatever. It was some kind of demonic activity. Now, they're saying in this belief that the demons now have some sort of repulsion to meat. Now you think, that sounds weird. How would you know that? How would you know that? Okay, 1 Timothy chapter 4. Paul talks about deceiving spirits in the last days, in the end times, right? And they're going to come with their doctrines of demons. But one of the things that they're going to do in seeking to control mankind, as well as any believers and so on that would be on the earth at that time, one of the things they will seek to do is forbid, as the King James says, the eating of meat.
Boy, I'm going to be protected.
Why would they? Why would?
Bacon every day.
That's right. Why would they forbid that? I mean, there's this kind of a weird kind of, why would they? And then you kind of couple that with certain religions, Eastern religions and so on and so forth, like maybe say Hinduism or something like that, they kind of prohibit eating of meat, right? So it's a vegetarian kind of approach to things. Now, having said that, I don't believe being a vegetarian is necessarily like, oh, that must be evil or something like that. For health reasons or for whatever reasons. I'm not saying that necessarily, right? It's just a viewpoint. I don't necessarily hold to that completely 100%. I haven't really fleshed that out, but I thought that was an interesting kind of thought. Maybe in our discussion time afterwards, we can talk about that. But so I'm not saying that this says that we should be against being a vegetarian as well. On the same token, I would also say, and there's some people that are vegetarians say, oh, we have to go back to that because that's the way that originally was, and that's the more spiritual way. But that's not the truth, because God specifically tells Noah, it's basically not just supported, it's almost even commanded by God to do that, to eat meat, right? So now there are stipulations. Because in verse 4 it says, but you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is, its blood. Right? So we know there's a lot of laws like that in the Torah, in the law, right? But here, this is before the law. This is before the law was ever even given. He says, eat flesh, eat meat, but don't eat it with the blood. Now, in other words, we're not to eat animals while they're still alive. Right? So this isn't talking about don't have a steak that's rare. That's not what this is prohibiting. You gotta cook that thing so well done that it's shriveled up like leather or something like that. That's not what God is saying here. The point here is God is talking about life. Right? The life is in the blood. Right? That's what he's talking about. So first off, as human beings created in the image of God, we're not to be like animals. So animals hunt live animals and they kill them and they're eating them while they're still alive, right? That's not what we're supposed to be. We're not animals. We're different, right? When the world tries to tell us we're just like one another, just another type of species of animals. No, we're not. No, we are different. We are created differently than the animals. We don't have the same instincts, right? So we're not to be like those. That's one issue. But secondly, the issue God really ultimately is that God wants us to value life. Mm-hmm. Life is meant to be valued. Now, even in the killing of animals, to eat them, I mean, he says to do that. But even in that, we're supposed to respect the life even of the animals, right? I mean, so in other words, we're not to just go out killing animals kind of just haphazardly, just for any reason. That might speak to be honest with you, sport hunting, or people that just kill animals to kind of put them on mount them on I'm not like dogmatic about that. I'm not saying, oh, they're the worst kinds of sin. That's the unpardonable sin. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is that God's seeking here in this kind of prohibition of blood and whatnot is to value life. And let me just go on beyond that even, because this isn't about even the life of the animal. that he's trying to get across. The point here is that he wants us not to only respect life, but to respect the life of man, human life, right? So there's a process of devaluing life. We devalue the life of animals, and then eventually we start devaluing the life of humans. That's a very real process in the mind of a serial killer. They start with killing animals because it's just a process. When you start devaluing life just in general, it's just not a very far jump to get to devaluing human life. Verse 5 and 6, God goes on and he says, surely for your blood, I will demand a reckoning. Here he's talking about human life. From the hand of every beast, so animals themselves, I will require it. From the hand of man, from the hand of every man's brother, I will require the life of a man. Whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed. For in the image of God he made them. So even of the beasts, right? If a beast killed a man, the life of that beast would be required of that beast, of that animal. Okay, now here's the thing. What we have here in these two verses, just right off the bat, because you remember, this isn't the Mosaic Law. This was preceded that. This is really God's heart and God's viewpoint of all of this. And what we have here is the dawn of civil governance. Basically, what he's saying is God desires us to value all human life. But if someone, or even a beast, but primarily, you're talking about man, if someone doesn't value human life and takes it, God is giving the responsibility of handling the punishment for that person. He's giving the responsibility of that punishment, or the dealing with that, to mankind. That this is one of the main structures that God is giving to society, to civilization. This is how we're supposed to handle the situation in our societies. And what we have here is basically what we're talking about is capital punishment. That's what we're talking about, right? And here's the thing. People fight against capital punishment, right? And they say, well, the Bible says, thou shalt not kill. It's one of the 10 commandments, right? And when they say that, God told us not to kill, they're completely misunderstanding that commandment, right? That commandment better really is translated, thou shalt not murder. Thou shalt not murder. We're talking about taking matters into your own hands, premeditated murder, right? That is surely prohibited by God. God never intended, though, a society to forfeit the responsibility to punish those who devalue life. It is actually one of the basic foundations of a society, right? Listen, God's approach is meant actually to bring order, to bring structure to a society, that the people in that society can have assurance and feel safe that it's not just going to be allowed that people can run around or move around in society and just kill people at will and not have any retribution or reprisal for their actions. That's just what God's telling us. Let me just say this, and maybe we can discuss it afterwards, and you may not agree with me, but I believe that those two verses alone are a justification for war. People would say, well, why would God have people go out to war? Why is that? That's not right. No. But what I believe is what God is saying is not starting wars unjustly. I understand, okay, don't get me wrong. But if a nation sees another nation wrongfully attacking and killing people that are innocent, right, then they have the right and maybe even the responsibility to try and stop them. To stop them. So people will say, well, how can we justify war? This is why. Because that particular nation or that entity or that group is devaluing life. And God's saying that has to stop. You have to do something about that. Now, I know not all war is justified, right? Some wars are, fought for political or financial gain, and those are wrong. If we were watching a series the other day on the Vietnam War, and for the U.S. and the more I look at it, I'm like, wow, what a weird and not justifiable war we fought, and it showed, right? It was just, someone once said, as wars go, we're 10-1, it's like maybe 12-1 or whatever now. But it's just, that was just a wrong reason to go in and fight. So, not to get all on that, but let me just say this. When a society moves away from God and from his ways, one of the evidence that you see in that society is they start to devalue life, right? And so instead of fighting for life, they start to fight for personal rights. Personal rights, above all things, above life. And what does that look like? Because we see that in the U.S., we see that in the UK. People will fight tooth and nail to save the life of a murderer, right? Who's already devalued life, taken life. And yet they will also fight tooth and nail for the personal rights to kill an unborn child. When you see a society like that, they are moving further and further away from God, because that is not God's heart, right? God's heart is to value life, especially innocent life, right? They are far from God. Our aim ultimately should be this, right? Verse 6, he says, as for you, be fruitful and multiply. Bring forth abundantly in the earth and multiply in it. That principle is about life. It's all about bringing forth life, protecting life, going out and promoting life. So we move on. Verse 7. I'm going to read quite a few verses, 11 or so verses. From verse 7. Again, God spoke to Noah and to his sons with him, saying, and as for me, behold, I establish my covenant with you and with your descendants after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the cattle, and every beast of the earth with you, and all that go out of the ark, every beast of the earth. Thus I establish my covenant with you. Never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of the flood. Never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. And God said, this is the sign of the covenant which I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for perpetual generations. So not just now, but for all generations to go for through. He says, I set my rainbow in the cloud, and it shall be for the sign of the covenant between me and the earth. It shall be when I bring a cloud over the earth, that the rainbow shall be seen in the cloud. And I will remember my covenant, which is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh. The waters shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. The rainbow shall be in the cloud, and I will look on it to remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth. And God said to Noah, this is the sign of the covenant which I have established between me and all flesh that is on the earth. And we'll stop there. What God is speaking is what is called the Noahic covenant. He is making a covenant with mankind, with the earth, really. And God is promising, again, that he will never destroy the whole earth with a flood. So a covenant is a sovereign decree by God. It's a contract, if you will. And if you know anything about contracts, they're meant to be binding. Most people, we have a lot of breaking of contracts in life and in society and so on. That's why we have so many lawyers. But, but a contract is meant to be binding, right? So that's what a covenant is. And in this particular contract, because these covenants, you have several different covenants throughout the Old Testament, New Testament, like 8 to be exact. And some of the covenants, some of the contracts, if you will, are between God and man. So there's a two-party contract. But some of them, like this one, is really God making a covenant with himself. Right? You see that with the Abrahamic covenant. We'll go into all the covenants, but God makes a covenant with himself, right? So this covenant is with God himself. We are the recipients, if you will, of this covenant, right? And so this is a covenant that God has made. Now, this is called the Noahic covenant. And God is not going to flood the earth, okay? But he seals the covenant. The sign of the covenant is the rainbow. Now, it's interesting because we know, more or less, scientifically, we know what a rainbow is, right? And I'm not a scientist, so somebody probably can explain it better, but obviously light, reflecting, I don't know what you would call it, off of the moisture that's in the air, right? Divides the light into the different various rays of different colors, and we see a rainbow, right? And it kind of emanates. So, but here's the thing: we understand it, but the truth is that effect could not have happened before the flood, right? Because remember, before the flood, there was that layer of water that covered the whole earth, right? And because of that layer, the light, affected the earth in a much, much different way. And so they wouldn't have had rainbows. That would not have been something. So because that layer's gone, now you have a rainbow. So every time it would rain, you can imagine when it would rain, the people would freak out like, oh no, it's happening again, And then they would see the rainbow. And, okay. Remember, God said he wasn't going to do it anymore, right? That's good, right? They know God is true to his word. But also, that rainbow also tells us that the flood of Noah was truly a worldwide flood. I'll tell you why. Because we still have floods in our history, in our world today. We just had one last year in Houston. Our family, our friends, Hurricane Harvey, and like a massive area flooded, and we have severe floods and people die. So this is not what God was talking about. God is talking about no longer having a worldwide flood, destroying the whole earth with a flood. That's what he is talking about. It can't be a localized flood because then God would be a liar. And God's not a liar. And, well, interestingly enough as well, anytime God sets something out for us to, it's a sign, it's something for us to remember, the world is going to try to either, destroy it or kind of devalue it or take it and use it for something completely different. So we know, right, we see the rainbow and now it means something completely different in our society today. Like, I want to start this campaign, like, take back the rainbow, kind of a thing. But, listen, one day God will take back the rainbow, right? It'll all be his, and he'll sort it all out, right? So we don't have to worry about that too much. Let's continue. Verse 18. Now, the sons of Noah who went out from the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And Ham was the father of Canaan. And these three were the sons of Noah, and from these the whole earth was populated. And Noah began to be a farmer, and he planted a vineyard. Then he drank of the wine and was drunk, and became uncovered in his tent. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father, and told his two brothers outside. But Shem and Japheth took a garment, laid it on both their shoulders, and went backward and covered the nakedness of their father, and their faces were turned away, and they did not see their father's nakedness. So we have this weird event, right? And this is, again, when I was talking about at the beginning, how God, he's good. He's faithful to show us the flaws of men and how they do things they shouldn't be doing. Right? Even righteous men. Noah was righteous. But let me tell you, Noah messed up here. Right? And he got drunk. Now, some people might say, well, maybe they didn't have, they didn't grow grapes and they didn't have fermentation. And I'm like, no. trust me, the whole world was evil before the flood, was evil constantly, continually, every thought, I mean, I'm sure it involved alcohol. You know, I guarantee you it involved alcohol. So this wasn't something new and okay, he didn't know. I mean, he did. He just made a mistake. He messed up, right? And that's a problem, okay. But much worse than what Noah's issue was and his flaw, because he wasn't a perfect man. He was a righteous man, but not a perfect man, right? But much worse than what Noah did is what his son did, right? In fact, it tells us he saw his father's nakedness and told his brothers outside. Now you're thinking, well, okay, he saw his dad naked. What's the big deal? You know, like, okay. That's not so much the deal, right? First of all, the text implies that he didn't just merely see it and then told his brothers, right? He did it in such a way to humiliate his father. He was exposing his father's shame, his father's mess up, you know, his father's sin. He was disrespecting his father, right, to his brothers. He's probably like, oh man, can you believe it? Look at dad. Oh man, oh, you know, he's in there. You know, whatever the case was, however you want to put it, he was disrespecting his father. Think about this. Noah was the father of all mankind, right? He was a righteous man. He obeyed God. Now he messed up. He got drunk, right? Not a good thing, but he was still a righteous man, and he's really a type of Christ, as Adam was. So for Ham to take advantage, because that's what Ham did. Noah got drunk, and that was a mess up. You know, a lot of times when you're drinking, you don't realize until you get further along, and boom, you're in a state and you don't realize it. But Ham knew exactly what he was doing, right? He was disrespecting. He was taking advantage of his father's mishap. Right? His drunkenness. So listen, disrespect is a sin. And it's an important sin. Whether it's disrespect of our parents or just adults in general, right? Or even disrespect as it applies to authorities, government, or even in the church, leadership, and so on. Paul speaks about disrespect. He says it's one of the signs of the last days that children will be disrespectful of their parents.
I am one of them.
Okay.
That's what
Church, you know, he talks about respecting church leaders. He talks about respecting governments, even governments that we don't agree with. Think about the government that was in control in Paul's day. It was the Romans. They took Christians, they stuck them, dipped them in pitch and stuck them up there for their tiki lamps, right? You know, like to light their gardens up. That's the kind of government. If any government deserved to have like disrespect, it would have been the Romans. But no, Paul said to respect the government. You might not agree with him. You might, if there's a means to vote against or whatever, that's not disrespect. You're using your civil, kind of responsibility and duties. That's fine. But we're to respect. And I'll tell you why. Because respect has everything to do with our inner attitude towards others. And listen, if we are one of respect, then ultimately it leads to disrespect of God. It does. It leads to respect. A society that cultivates a disrespectful attitude amongst its citizenship is a society that's moving fast and furiously away from God. We had it. We saw it in the 60s. And even beyond that, you have the universities that question everything. Question your parents. Question authority. Now where are we going? Where are we heading? But God deals with it, right? He swiftly deals with it. Verse 24 says, so Noah awoke from his wine, and he knew what his younger son had done to him. And then he said, this is coming down. Cursed be Canaan. So not Ham, interesting, but his descendants. So this wasn't going to just be for you. It's going to continue on in the generations to follow. Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants he shall be to his brethren. And then he said, blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem, and may Canaan be his servant, and may God enlarge Japheth, and may he dwell in the tents of Shem, and may Canaan be his servant. So God blessed the descendants of Shem, and the descendants of Japheth. Why? Because they respected, right? They did the right thing with their father before God. Not with Cain, not with Canaan or Ham, his descendants. It says Noah lived after the flood 350 years. So all the days of Noah were 950 years, and he died. So we're going to see this attitude. I'm just going to show you the effects of disrespect as it affects a society. We're going to see as we move along. We're going to get to the next chapter, chapter 10, and we're going to see it. But chapter 10 is commonly called the Table of Nations because it's dealing with all the descendants and the genealogies of Noah's three sons, Ham, Shem, and Japheth, on the earth. Now, there are going to be a lot of names. There's a lot of begots, or begets. And I'm just going to tell you, you can read them all on your own later if you're looking for names, if you're going to have kids later someday in life, and you're looking for some great names, or if you know some people that are, you can suggest those names. And but I'm not going to read them all, chapter 10. So I will take a few moments here and there to highlight some of these I think are important ones. So chapter 10, verse 1 says, "This is now the genealogy of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and the sons were born to them after the flood." So first off, you have a listing of these in the next several verses. You have the listing of the genealogies of Japheth. Now, experts would say his genealogy and his descendants, they were the father of the more European nations, as well as including Western Europe, or not Western Europe, but Western Russia. You have names like that are synonymous or that kind of connected to Russia, names like Tubal and Meshach and so on. But notice verse 10, interesting verse. It says in verse 10, "From these the coastland peoples of the Gentiles were separated into their lands, everyone according to his language, according to their families, into their nations." Did I say 10? Is it verse 5? I apologize. Verse 5, excuse me. Now that's the first time the word Gentile is used in the Bible. And it actually just simply means a nation or people, right? And so I just kind of wanted to point that out. But as well, it says according to his language. So don't get confused because we're going to cover chapter 11 and it talks about them having all one language. So this genealogy covers kind of beyond the Tower of Babel and so on and so forth. So that's why we get this idea of according to their families or according to his language. So then next up you have the descendants of Ham. And his descendants, it talks about different places and areas, but it covers primarily the areas of Africa or Egypt, Ethiopia, and so on, and areas of Saudi Arabia and the Arabian Peninsula and so on. Now, an interesting, in this section, we meet an individual, verses 8 through 12. It says, "Cush begot Nimrod, and he began to be a mighty one on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore it is said, like Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord." Kind of redundant, but in the beginning, it says, "And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel." And then it says, "Erech, Akkad, Calneh, and the land of Shinar." Some of it may sound familiar. Babel, Shinar, so on. And then it says, "From that land he went to Assyria and built Nineveh." And then it lists some other ones, and it says that is the principal city. So Nimrod is this character that it mentions specifically in this list of genealogies as very important, because in this reboot of mankind, Nimrod basically is the first king, or really beyond that, really more of an overlord or a tyrant, right? When it says he's a mighty hunter before the Lord, that's like sounds really good, right? No, not good. He was somebody that was like pushing his weight around, if you will, right? And that's the kind of person he was. And we're going to see what his influence looks like in the next chapter. But verse 21 on, we have the descendants of Shem. Now, Shem are what we would call the Semitic peoples. So you have the nation of Israel comes through Shem. Of course, then that means in the line that Jesus comes from, through the line of Shem, so the Messiah, right? Now, in his descendants, again, the Middle Eastern regions and so on, also further east, China, Mongolia, and some people even believe as those individuals went over the Bering Straits or through Alaska and so on, they also include the people, the American Indians, as well as all the different people in North and South America. Right, so there's that. That's covering all of the nations. But interesting, one verse to note, it says in verse 24, to Eber were born two sons. The name of one was Peleg, for in his days the earth was divided, and his brother's name was Joktan. Now, first, Eber, most scholars would believe that the name Eber is where we get the term Hebrew from. Take it for what it is, Eber. But what the name I want to point out is this person by the name of his son, Peleg, right? Because it talks about the days the earth was divided. Now, a lot of people will say, and I've heard teachings on this, that it's just a reference to the Tower of Babel, that when the earth was divided because of the languages. But that, I don't necessarily know if I hold to that, because interestingly enough, the word Peleg can be translated divided, but it actually means earthquake. His name means earthquake. So, yeah, there you go. My son's pointing at me like I know what he's talking about. So that was a nickname I had when I was a kid, earthquake, because they said when I ran the ground shook. But his name literally was earthquake, right? And so I believe that this is actually a reference to whether it was in the time of before Peleg was born or during that time, that his father, Eber, there was something going on. Massive earthquakes could have been taken. I believe that massive earthquakes were taking place. More than likely, they would have still been aftershocks of the effects of the flood, because it talks about the fountains of the deep were erupting, and that would have caused massive earthquakes, tectonic plates starting to shift. And if you know anything about tectonic plates, it's kind of like when you hit your brake of a car, your car doesn't stop immediately, right? When you hit your brake, the car takes however many feet to actually slow down and stop. It's the same with tectonic plates. Some even believe, I've heard even some certain scientists that believe in the literal flood, they said the earthquakes that we are seeing even today are still aftermaths of the effects of what happened during the flood, that the tectonic plates are still slowing down. So the momentum of the tectonic plate is moving, and then all of a sudden, it goes a little bit more. And that's when you have an earthquake, right? So this would have been very close, relatively speaking, to the effects of the flood. And there were earthquakes. Now, and in that sense, it would have started to spread the land masses, the eastern and western hemispheres, apart, all of the land masses. There's a term that people use, it's called Pangea. Have you ever heard that expression? Pangea is where the belief that at one point in time in our Earth's history, all of the land masses were all one. They were all one, kind of like together. Yep. And it's kind of interesting, because if you look at North and South America and the way they're shaped, and you look at Europe and the western coast of Africa, they kind of look like they could go together, right? Or if you look at the Indian Ocean and you look at Australia, you go, hey, that can fit right in there. So we weren't there, so we don't know exactly what happened, but I believe that's part of the division of the languages, that God moved people, those languages spread out, and then all of a sudden, even the land masses, to divide them, were being moved away from one another, right? So, just a theory, just an idea. Verse 32, it says, now, these were the families of the sons of Noah, according to the generations in their nations, and from these nations were divided on the earth after the flood. So, we move from there to chapter 11. We're going to go through this somewhat quickly. Excuse me. Verses 1 through 4, it says, now the whole earth had one language and one speech, and it came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar. And there they dwelt. And they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly." They had brick for stone, and they had asphalt for mortar. And they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth." Now, we'll stop there. This plain of Shinar is obvious reference to Nimrod. Nimrod was a descendant of Ham, right? And we're going to see the disrespect, the attitude, the influence of Ham is moving down into all of the generations, right, into Nimrod. Now, they had bricks and mortar. That's pretty cool because, a lot of times people believe, people in the ancient cultures, they were ignorant and, caves, and they had sticks and, no, they were very intelligent, very intelligent. They weren't primitive. Most anthropologists that know anything, that are really worth their salt, they would say maybe they don't have technology like we have it, but they had quite the intelligence. You look at the pyramids, or you look at in South America and Central America, the pyramid type buildings that they built. They had intelligence. They knew exactly what they were doing. But the question is, why were these folks building this tower, and what were the ramifications? What was it really about? This wasn't just like a project of enthusiasm. We're going to build a tower. It's going to be big. It's high. Let's do our best. We're going to do our best for God. No, this was not about something for God. In fact, this tower was a direct challenge to God. It was a direct challenge against God. First of all, God told Noah and his sons and his descendants to fill the earth, right? To multiply and fill the earth. What does that mean? That means to spread out, to move out. So what were these people doing? No way, we're not spreading out, right? We don't want to be scattered. We want to gather together in one location, right? That's what they were doing. So this was clear disobedience. First and foremost, clear disobedience from God. Secondly, it tells us that they wanted to build this tower that the top would be in heaven. So this was an act of defiance, a defiance to God. It's like, oh, you flooded us once, you're not going to flood us again, right? We're going to build a tower that goes up to heaven. If you want to try to flood, you're going to have to flood yourself, kind of thing. We're going to build a tower, right? This is what we're going to do. So it's an act of defiance. It was a challenge towards God from the people. Lastly, it was a complete act of unbelief, because God already had told them that I will no longer flood the earth, and I won't do that. I won't destroy the world with a flood. And they're saying well, I know what you said, but I don't think we believe you. So just in case you decide you're going to change your mind, or you're going to be a God who doesn't really follow his word or changes his mind and does something completely opposite, we're going to build a tower, right? That's what they're doing. So it was an act of disobedience, it was an act of defiance, and it was an act of unbelief on their part. And that's where disrespect gets you. That is what the attitude of disrespect down the lines got you. Nimrod led the people, and they were like, yeah, let's do this. Now, God had a response. Verse 5, but the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. And the Lord said, indeed, the people are one, and they all have a one language, and this is what they begin to do. Now, nothing that they propose to do will be withheld from them. Come, let us go down, and they are confused their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they ceased building the city. Therefore, its name is called Babel, because the Lord confused, that's what Babel means, confused, the language of all the people. And from there, the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth. Now, verse 7 in this chapter, it's an homage, or not homage, but it's a nod to the Trinity. Let us go down. God wasn't talking to the angels. God was speaking as unto the Trinity, the Son and the Holy Spirit. They were speaking together. Let us do this. We talked about that before when we looked at in Genesis, the first couple chapters of Genesis. Also, verse 6, now this is kind of interesting. Now they propose to do, what they propose to do will, now nothing they propose to do will be withheld for them. Excuse me. Now, when they say that, and God's like, it's not like God going, well, I don't want that, and we got to do something about it because, like God was envious or something. Like, well, they're going to achieve something, and we don't want them to achieve that, God wasn't jealous that they were going to build a tower. No, he understood. This is his decision to do what he did was an act of love and mercy. Because once again, just like we talked about with the flood, God didn't judge the earth because he was mad at the earth. He wanted to keep them from themselves. The wickedness was so heinous that he wanted to stop the furtherance of it and the effect that it was having on all of the world. And the only way he could do that was just to wipe them all out, deal with it like that. And so in this case, he knew that if he let them going, that men's hearts would get so hard and so hardened, there would be no return from it. Right? There's that place, that's that point in people's lives when they reject God or they refuse God, that there's a place of no return. We read that in previous, when God said, my spirit will not strive with a man always. So God is saying, I got to do something about this because they're going to get to a point that there's no return from this. Their hearts are going to be so hardened against God. And we see that in the world today. We see that with people today. When people gather together, right, they just, especially if it's something against God or against Christianity, against believers. I mean, it's oftentimes I think odd, strange bedfellows that Christianity makes of their enemies, people that hate Christianity or whatever. Anyway, God was gonna step in and not judge, but divine mercy upon man. He was basically going to use the divide and conquer method with people. He's going to divide them by their languages, causing them to have to divide in a geographical sense as well. And it worked, right? Because they ceased building the city, right? So you're working on the city, and then some guy turns and says, "Hand me a wrench," and the guy looks at him and goes, "All I heard was like whatever he said. I just don't even know what he wanted me." And then I don't know what you said. And then that guy looks back and says, "All I heard from you was like whatever the language. I don't know. I don't speak. I only speak English. So, but it's funny because now you realize we can't get any work done. We got to stop. There you go. Boom. So it worked. And think about this: from the very moment of the fall of mankind, God had a plan to save mankind. Satan, before the fall, tried to thwart it with all the demonic stuff going on the earth. Right now, these people were going to try to cause stuff to happen on the earth. And God says, I'm not going to allow that. I'm going to bring a Savior into this world. And I'm going to keep man from basically hurting themselves. Right? I'm going to keep them from hurting themselves. So, and I don't understand necessarily why people want to kind of reject God or want to think, well, we can do it. Like kind of in a way, mankind today is building their own Tower of Babels, right? Their own methods and ways. We can handle it. We can do things. Because I don't understand. Because as far as I can tell, they haven't come up with a cure for death. They haven't come up with a cure. They haven't figured out how to get out of that, right? And because we can't stop it, we're trying to figure out ways around it. Or, well, death isn't really, we just die and we stop existing. Or you're reincarnated. Or, there are all different kinds of things that they would say. But it's just really trying to build their own Tower of Babels, their own versions. And so listen, the thing is, God isn't done with us, right? He's got a plan, and he's going to, keep rebellious man from thwarting his plan, as we see here. Now, the rest of this chapter, again, more genealogies that really, the specific genealogy, very important genealogy, but that leads us to the dawn of a nation, the dawn of the nation Israel, and one man particularly, Abraham. So I won't read all of those genealogies. We'll kind of cover it next week to some degree, but let me just say this. We're going to dive in to a character next week, Abraham, which apart from Jesus Christ, I think Abraham is probably the most central figure in all of human history. All of human history. And we talked about this a few weeks ago, but it's the way God works, right? God is always looking for one man, one person. He always works. That's the way he works. And here, we're going to see one man, but he uses that one man to set his plan in motion, right? So next week, we're going to look at Abraham, right? So go ahead, let's go ahead and pray.